Aware that by the third week of January 2020, the World Health Organization has declared COVID-19 as a pandemic, and international health emergency was declared. Aware that Nigeria recorded its first index case of COVID-19 on Thursday, 27 February 2020, involving a 44-year-old Italian who came from Italy to provide consultancy services to a company in Ogun State. Note that the National Center for Disease Control, NCDC, set up an emergency operation center to handle the outbreak of COVID-19 in Nigeria on February 28, 2020. Note that the President Commander-in-Chief set up a multi-sector presidential task force to coordinate and implement the national response to COVID-19 in Nigeria in the third week of March 2020. The Senate observes that Mr. President Commander-in-Chief, being worried by the relentless rise in the number of cases, especially in Lagos, Ogun State, and FCT, declared a lockdown in the two states and the FCT on 29th of March 2020, effective Monday, 30th March 2020, for 14 days. The lockdown was extended again on March 13th, April 2020, for another 14 days. Senate further observes that many states in Nigeria also instituted lockdowns in their domains, including closure of their borders. Senate notes the inconveniences and the restrictions have put the lives of Nigerians and appreciates their cooperation and patience in view of the limitations of the various palliatives and support provided by the federal, state governments, organized private sector, and public-spirited individuals to the citizens during the lockdown. Senate further notes the hardship brought on the daily income earners and other vulnerable groups by the pandemic and the lockdown response, and fully appreciates the sacrifices being made by these groups of Nigerians during this trying period. The Senate is concerned about the social, economic, psychological, health, and security consequences and impact of the lockdown strategy on the citizens of Nigeria. The Senate is concerned that the ineffectiveness of the lockdown, due to, among others, poor awareness of citizens about the dangers of COVID-19, poor mobilization, education, and enlightenment of the citizens, and inadequacies and inefficiencies in distribution of the palliatives during the lockdown. Senate is disturbed that despite all actions by the Presidential Task Force and the NCDC, the cases of COVID-19 continue to rise in Nigeria, with community transmission now happening and becoming a major threat to people's lives. Senate is disturbed further that from one state and one case on Thursday, 27 February, as at Sunday, 26 April 2020, that is 8 weeks later, 32 states plus FCT have now cases of COVID-19, with total cases of 1,273, 239 discharged, and 40 deaths have already been recorded. The Senate is worried that with a population of over 200 million people, only 11,426 tests have been carried out so far. The Senate is concerned that there are many challenges with the management of the situation in Nigeria, which include A, shortage of extraction kits and testing kits in the country, B, non-uniform treatment of regimen at treatment facilities, C, limited resources to support the state at point of care, D, limited information to guide distribution of medical products, E, low stocks of essential supplies, F, poor coordination of response between the federal and state governments, G, poor utilization of available human and manufacturing capacities. and further notes that the massive disruption of the world economy caused by the pandemic has its direct effect on Nigeria in the form of the collapse of the price of crude oil, the main source of income for the country, and consequently the drop in the revenue sources such as VAT, taxes, custom duties due to local and international lockdowns. This has dire consequences for the welfare of the people and the economy of the nation. The Senate is convinced that given all the efforts being made to fight the pandemic scourge, the time has now come for the nation to take stock of the successes achieved and the challenges ahead. The Senate accordingly resolves to A. 1. Commend the President and Commander-in-Chief of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, President Muhammadu Buhari, for confronting the COVID pandemic by providing effective leadership and having risen to the occasion when it matters most. 2. Further commend the leadership, the committee chairmen, and members of the National Assembly, who throughout this trying period engaged and worked with the Presidential Task Force, the Ministries of Finance and Humanitarian Affairs, the Central Bank of Nigeria, the Nigerian National Petroleum Commission, and other executive bodies in providing leadership support, creative solutions, material supplies, and palliatives to address the challenges of COVID-19 pandemic. 3. Further commends the frontline patriotic health workers for their hard work, diligence, and sacrifices, including putting their lives on the line in tackling this pandemic. 4. Senate further commends the PTF, the NCDC, the Federal Ministry of Health, hospitals, and other health institutions, both public and private, for their steadfastness, dedication in combating the pandemic. 5. Senate appreciates the World Health Organization and international development partners, corporate bodies, faith-based organizations, and individuals for their donations and support towards fighting the health issues brought about by the pandemic. 6. The Senate urges the executive arm of government to rejig the implementation strategy and structures for the response to the pandemic to ensure better coordination between federal, state, local government, and the private sector, particularly in detection, isolation, treatment of cases, distribution of palliatives, and other interventions. 7. Senate urges the executive to set up a national technical committee on COVID-19 made of relevant scientists and health professionals, both at home and abroad. The committee should be charged with the responsibility of developing national strategic response and homemade solutions to the pandemic, including the detailed epidemiology of the disease in Nigeria, the development and production of rapid testing kits, effective therapy, prevention mechanisms. Number 8, Senate urges the executive to articulate a coherent and coordinated exit strategy from the lockdown through a phased opening of the economic and social spheres of the nation without compromising the safety of the citizens and ensure that there is no increase in the rate of infection. 9, Senate calls on the PTF and the state governors to embark on massive mobilization, education, and enlightenment of Nigerians on the reality of the pandemic and ways and means of protecting themselves, their families, and communities from contracting and spreading the virus. 10. Senate urges the executive to fast-track the submission of the revised medium-term expenditure framework, the fiscal strategy paper, and the 2020 national budget to the National Assembly for consideration and passage. Finally, 11. Senate urges the executive to use this grim period to change the trajectory and structure of the Nigerian economy by appropriating at least 10% of the GDP as a stimulus package for investment into the following. 1. Health and education infrastructures. 2. Agricultural value chains. 3. solid mineral value chains. 4, renewable sources of energy. 5, petroleum industry value chain. 6, infrastructure and public works, namely roads, railways, harbors, power, waterways, etc. And 7, investment on integrating research, science, technology, and innovation into agriculture, industry, and manufacture.
What is facing us today is like a lottery. And once you're a human being, you have purchased that lottery. And so nobody is exempt. And now it is a matter that can reach anybody, high or low, rich or poor. And therefore, it presents us in the midst of all the difficulties with opportunities which we can now harness. Since nobody can jump on a plane and run away to be treated elsewhere, everybody will now look into the health sector of Nigeria and every other thing within our country. It is obvious to each and every one of us today that the solutions of our problems, we now have to find it ourselves. That means it gives us that unique opportunity to be able to actually think inwards. And so, while we commiserate with those who have unfortunately been victims of this pandemic, we also say that this gives us a new vista that we can use to be able to deal with it. And like we have seen, those areas, either in health or in agriculture or in our industrial sector, this is now the time for us to actually resolve the issues that we have been running away from all this while. My dear colleagues, what the people we need to commend are Nigerians. Nigerians have been so patient with us. The pandemic came from outside. That means it is the privileged ones who were able to come. And everyone is suffering today. And yet we continue to ask for more sacrifice from them. And they are willing and they are able to give it. And so I commend Nigerians, just like we have said here in the second, is it the second or the third resolution? And we say to Nigerians, please tarry a little while so that we can get to the bottom of this and we will come out to have a better country. As we go ahead, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the times also call for sacrifice. And that means that we will be taxed. Sacrifice in terms of giving ourselves, giving our resources, giving our intellect, and giving everything that we have to be able to confront this pandemic. And as we do so, I also urge that each and every one of us will do his or her utmost best to be able to help us to deal with the problems that have come with this disease. I so submit.
We are in a very dangerous times in the history of humanity. And like my colleague said, we need to return to God, all of us. At the risk of repeating what had been said, let me caution that it is a common knowledge that majority of Nigerians, not all, majority of Nigerians are fond of taking advantage of situations that they shouldn't do. I'm talking about where we are now, those of us that are given responsibility to watch over these things that require funding. Let us be, as much as possible, demonstrate statesmanship because the lives of Nigerians are involved. We know that what is happening is uncommon, and it has, I don't want to talk about the economy because we are paying dearly for being a stiff-necked people, for ignoring an anthem that has been on our lips for a long time. That let us diversify. We will speak and it will not be in our heart. For a long time, by the time we had heeded this warning or this anthem that we had been singing, for now we'll have fallen back to agriculture. Now, to even produce oil is a huge burden on us. And that is why we will be prepared to pay the huge price. And I pray the Lord God will help us. Lastly, Mr. President, we are confused about the origin of this pandemic. There are a lot of controversial and sometimes scandalous theories associated with the origin of this. I want to caution us as a nation that we must be careful in dealing with foreign powers so that we don't end up mortgaging Nigeria as a nation to a foreign power that is testing for new colonialism, that is battling to control nations or regions across Africa. For we have become a very vulnerable nation, and most of the powers are battling how they can exert control. It's a new form of colonialism that is wriggling out now. May the Lord God help us. And like my colleague said, those of us that play religion and are doing another thing, let us intensify our zeal for serving God. Let us not play politics with serving God, because the time may no longer be there. Don't afford to be taken unawares.
First, I'd like to join you in commiserating with Mr. President and the people of Nigeria on the demise of the Chief of Staff, Malam Abba-Kyari, and the others who succumbed to this disease. May their souls rest in peace. Mr. President, I also want to thank God for His mercy